Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is noon. Thank you so much for joining us. I know we have a few others who will likely be making their way through the meeting room, and so we will continue to admit them. But we are going to go ahead and get started. Want to be respectful of everyone's time this afternoon. Again, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Paige Oxendine, and I'm the program coordinator at the efactory here in Springfield, Missouri. And today we're really excited to have a fantastic panel focused on innovative workforce solutions. And so thanks for taking the time to be with us. And we imagine that this is not your first virtual event throughout all of this coronavirus crisis. And so we're excited to have you with us. We have a really incredible group of panelists. They're actually also from all efactory partner organizations. And so we're thankful not only for them taking the time to be with us and share their insights on the panel, but of course for their organization's ongoing support of the efactory. And so, like I said, we will continue to admit people as they join. If you are an attendee, you will be muted upon default, upon entry. And so if you could leave yourself muted, that'll allow for the cleanest audio experience for everyone. If you have any questions for our panelists as we move throughout the discussion today, feel free to put those in the chat feature. And then if we have time at the end, we will get to those. And so that'll be the smoothest way to handle that. And of course, the first thing that we want to do when we get started here is allow each of our panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about who they are, where they work, and their role within the organization. And we're going to go ahead and do that. We'll go in alphabetical order, and we'll start with Emily Alloway from Truck Hero.
Hi, my name is Emily Alloway. I'm with Truck Hero here in Springfield, Missouri. We are located across the street from Evangel University in the old Solo Cup factory, so we take up a lot of real estate over here. We manufacture truck bed covers, liners, and accessories. I have been with the company for a little over a year and a half now, and that's me.
Great. And Celeste?
I'm Celeste Kramer. I am the System Director of Recruitment and Retention at CoxHealth. And most people know who CoxHealth is, but we are a 6-hospital healthcare system with over 12,000 employees. I'm responsible for all aspects of recruitment, employee engagement through rewards and recognition, and then all of our leadership and workforce development.
Great. And Tim?
All right, I'm Tim Digon with the ARC of the Ozarks. I've been with the organization for 15 years, but I've served as Executive Vice President for the last 2.5 years. The ARC is a local not-for-profit founded in 1964 by a group of parents that had a vision to really provide services for people with disabilities in the community. At that time, it was very, unfortunately, most parents sent away kids off to institutions when they were diagnosed with disability. So the ARC was fundamental in this area in starting the services, and it's grown tremendously since then. We have about 1,300 staff, and we serve over 3,000 individuals in different capacities here in Southwest Missouri and in Kansas City. And we provide a vast array of service I could spend a lot of time talking about, but I won't. Everything from beginning of life to end of life services, 24/7 services, residential services, mental health services, kind of the whole 9 yards. So I'm excited to talk to you guys today.
Great. Okay. Well, let's go ahead. We're going to jump right into it. And our first question is actually, we're going to waste no time. It's actually 2 questions in one. And I wanted to start with Celeste from CoxHealth on this one. Just to share some context is, I would say, what are some of the workforce challenges that your organization faces? And then the second part of that question would be telling us a little bit about how you have been adapting to address and meet those challenges.
So for some of the challenges that we face, we've always had issues with finding people to fill certain roles. So we have a lot of hard to fill positions in the organization. So recruitment has always been a priority in workforce development to make sure we can fulfill those needs. With COVID-19, it was interesting for us because we kind of have had this pendulum swing with our workforce where we were going from one moment of needing to fill 1,000 positions to within a few days, we had quite a few displaced employees that we were trying to find positions for. So we created a lot of different ways to try and find work for people during that time, while also making sure that it's value added work so we can be mindful of the finances of the system. And so we created a lot of different processes to help support that. And do you want me to dive into any of those?
Sure, yeah.
So one of the ones that I think was most critical, so I think it was Friday, I think it was March 13th, that's kind of the last day that I always say that was normal in terms of we were just focused on our recruiting efforts. And that Sunday I was called into a meeting with our incident command team regarding our workforce. And basically they were going to start implementing entrance screening at all of our entrances. And we have over 79 entrances across the system. And then at the same time, that following week, they would have to start to disrupt services. So our fitness centers were going to close. Some of our elective surgeries and procedures would be postponed indefinitely to help preserve PPE. And we had to find a way to help find those people work. So by Friday, we're talking about needing to fill 1,000 positions. Within the following week, we stood up in 5 days an entire internal temporary staffing agency where we were able to take people that were receiving all of their hours or they were fully displaced, like our fitness center staff, and help either supplement their hours or redeploy them in the system. So we also had to create a process for helping leaders who had new needs, because we found a lot of new positions ended up being needed through that to help manage PPE, to help make sure people were donning and doffing properly, so taking on and off their PPE properly to help prevent infection. So we also had to try and fill these new roles with temporary staff. So we had a lot of different moving parts, and at the same time, we were still recruiting for our vacant positions.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing. Tim, tell us a little bit about your challenges and some of the work that you all have done.
Yeah, so it's pretty complicated, but it's simple, really. Our biggest issue is recruitment for our direct support professionals. The direct support professionals that we employ are probably about 90% of our workforce, and there are frontline staff that directly implement the service. And the skill set required is pretty intense. It's everything from really a skill that's kind of lost right now is empathy, and finding people that have the heart and ability to work with people with disabilities that come from a wide range of backgrounds that need assistance, anything from personal care to passing medications to administering some medical treatments to helping them find a job. And even some of our individuals have some behavioral issues that we have to especially train our staff how to de-escalate and work with individuals that sometimes come from pretty tough backgrounds. So finding those staff is very difficult for 2 reasons. One, the pay is not adequate. It just isn't. In Missouri alone, this is not the ARC, but Missouri alone, the starting wage for direct support professionals is $10.71 for full-time staff to do that service. And our funding directly relies on state and Medicaid funding. It's called a waiver program. So the state of Missouri has an agreement with the federal government to a 60-40 match. So the feds kick in 60%, the state kicks in 40%, but they build a budget based on that to serve those individuals. So all of our rates are set by the state government. So we cannot simply just, if we can't find employees at that pay range, we have to, we can't just raise prices like other companies to recruit staff. We have to work with state, local, and federal authorities to try to increase funding efforts to be able to recruit individuals. The second challenge really is most people coming out of high school don't envision themselves working for a company like ours, typically. And it's been a massive failure on our part to get people excited about working with people with disabilities and the career opportunities that exist in this field. From a recruitment standpoint, but also from an educational standpoint, we have not done a good job as a whole, as an entity, but also just in the entire field of educating people on the need, what it looks like, and what kind of opportunities are out there. You know, CNAs and RNs were kind of in the same boat a long time ago, but they professionalized those positions. And I think that's gained a lot of credibility, obviously, and a lot of people love nurses. It's a great job. CNA is a good job. We have not done that with direct support professionals, and we're behind the curve on that. So we spend a lot of time, me in particular, working with organizations like MARF. It's a statewide association of providers like the ARC across the state of Missouri. There's over 120 members, working with state legislatures on not only the funding aspect, but also how can we find a way to gain momentum to make this an aspirable career for people where they want to come in and get paid $15 an hour to directly work with people with disabilities and find ways and career ladders to explore that. So we started on the ground. We're starting with funding. We spent a lot of efforts the last couple of years. The governor's actually been very good with us from a funding standpoint. It's going to be rough this year, obviously, with COVID. But the funding, but also the long-term goal of professionalizing that position. It's so fundamentally important, but it's viewed as an entry-level position right now, and that has to change.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Sounds like definitely a high level of coordination required between all of those entities. Emily, I know you mentioned before we got started that things have been busy at Truck Hero lately, even despite the coronavirus pandemic. So tell us a little bit about some of those challenges that you all face on the workforce front.
Sure, absolutely. So we're a manufacturing environment, so a little bit different from the healthcare field, but recruiting definitely is one of those aspects that we have had the challenges with furloughs, people working remotely, trying to continue to build on our culture, and we've also experienced some financial impact for a lot of different areas. Obviously, we've never quite experienced anything like this, but we have experienced challenges before. So we've worked to do very minimal long-term layoffs. And one of the things we did for the salaried team was that we took some of the financial hit to offset some of our financial losses. So that way we wouldn't have as big of a hole to dig ourselves out of once we started ramping back up production, which worked in our favor. And that kind of also displayed that, you know, we're all in this together. So that actually I thought was a really creative way of kind of spreading that, you know, financial burden out a little bit throughout the whole organization, so that we were all in it together and it was more of a team coming out of this on the other side. We have restructured some of the physical layout of the production areas to a layout that would accommodate CDC recommendations. That way we can ensure the safety of our employees and our leadership team. So those are some of the things we've done, where we were out of full production for a couple months. I mean, we were down to working skeleton crews, you know, the small teams that were working multiple areas and those sorts of things. And now we're ramping back up, and we're right back to pre-COVID now as far as our orders go. Actually, they're higher than before. So working on getting, you know, recruiting and getting employees back in the door more than we had before, you know, when we went through the furlough process. So we're actually getting more employees back now. We're working with some temp agencies to help staff us up in the meantime for right now. So hoping to hopefully make a, you know, long-term home for most of those employees. So those are the things that we've been doing.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so our second question, I know all of the things we've talked about, whether these are challenges specifically related to the coronavirus crisis or things that you may have been facing even prior, to be able to pivot and address those as an organization certainly requires some appetite for innovation and change. And so wanted to touch base with each of you about, you know, have there been changes in your organization that allow you to be more innovative, that allow you to make those quick pivots, again, whether it's in response to something like the coronavirus or other challenges, so that you can really continue to meet those workforce needs? And I wanted to start with Tim on this one.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's ironic with our organization that sometimes our field is so far behind with technology. When you think about the people we serve, we can serve somebody who has autism, who cannot utilize his or her voice to communicate effectively, or to a person that may have some mental health issues that require some significant behavioral interventions for help. And what we have not done a good job of is leveraging technology to increase levels of independence. So this last year, I know this is jumping ahead a little bit, but kind of meshes with this, we launched a campaign called Pathways to Greater Independence. Our field is so focused and so heavy on physical staff interventions. So for example, we have what are called ISLs, Individualized Supported Living, and it's available through the comprehensive waiver, where people can come in and receive support to live their daily life, but also anything that may involve with them going to work or whatever the case might be. So an example would be like 3 people living together in a home, and we may have a staff with those individuals 24 hours, 7 days a week, regardless of sometimes their needs, because it's a requirement. Some individuals don't need overnight staff, or some individuals don't need staff all day long, but we provide it because it's been the model. And the needs of those individuals really are individualized. It's not the same. So this innovation that we launched is kind of threefold. One, we look at effective ways to reduce physical staffing to increase independence. So teaching individuals systematically how to fade out staffing to where they may have 2 hours a day alone without staff in a safe way, where they have that ability to be alone without staff. I know that sounds crazy, but in our field, we have so much staff level intensity that's something we're looking to address. We're starting at. The second is what is called remote supports. So instead of just supplying one-to-one staffing on the overnight or a staff for each individual on the overnight, we're looking at what is called remote supports. It is the ability to use a platform and that can install sensors. So we can have bed sensors, door sensors. If they want a camera in the home to talk to us, they can. Instantaneous communication, where it's voice and visual communication via iPad or a tablet immediately. Even fire and smoke detection alarms, so that we can actually go from like a 1-to-3 ratio when someone's in the overnight to a 1-to-12 ratio and do it remotely, to where we can actually support individuals remotely. If they have we see an issue and we know they usually sleep from 11 to 7, but they have not been in their bed and the front door opened, you can immediately remote into the home to find out what's going on, to talk to the person. So we're trying to find a way to utilize that remote support, not only to reduce levels of staffing, to increase independence and save money for the state, but also I think it's fundamentally important to understand that sometimes supplying physical staff it creates not only a burden on the individual, but almost a dependency. So we're finding ways to do that. And the third is really getting individuals with disabilities that we serve more involved in the workforce and making sure they have a job. The unemployment or the unemployment numbers for people with disabilities is atrocious, and it shouldn't be. And I think that if we can find ways to creatively work with individuals to increase that and use some assistive technology as well. Some people, like I mentioned, with autism that may not be able to vocalize verbally can use an iPad to communicate. And we've been very poor, I would say, as an organization, but also in the entire field of leveraging that technology to give people a voice or give them the ability to do something new and different. And it's simple things like assistive technology to utilize their own devices to feed him or herself. I mean, even down to that level where we can increase levels of independence at every level you can think about. It doesn't matter the level of sometimes of a disability a person has. You could always find ways to increase their ability to find better ways to be more independent and less dependent on physical staffing. And I could tell you story after story about how much that increases someone's not only self-esteem, self-worth, but also their self-determination to live a life that they are leading, not staff in the home.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing. Emily, we'll go to you next.
Sure. So change and innovation, right? They're always happening, and it can be fast or slow, and it can be, I guess, by design, or it can be forced. And I think one thing that many organizations and professionals are experiencing right now is forced innovation, right, during this whole time. So when you have no other options, I guess, but to climb the mountain, many people start climbing. And that's kind of what we did. One of the things my husband actually trains people on, organizations on, is innovation. And he has told me many times that so many people misinterpret what innovation truly is. And you don't have to do something revolutionary. It's basically identifying a problem and working to find a solution that provides value to the organization. It can be incremental, it can be revolutionary, or it can be at that space between. And we've had many aspects of that in our manufacturing process. So with temporarily allowing making it to where one person can run multiple stations at a time. We had to do that for a chunk of time because we were running much smaller teams, and we had to figure out a way to make things still keep going while we had so many people still out on furlough. So that was kind of a forced innovation for us, is that how do we manage this business and keep it going during this time where we have no other choice but to keep it going. So those are some of the things we did. We moved stations around and things like that. Last year, we implemented continuous improvement cards. Seems so simple, right? But that was an idea that actually came from, one of our entry-level associates on the production floor. It was like, hey, how do we get a voice? And I was like, that's a great idea. So, those continuous improvement cards that we have placed around the facility for the employees to write down questions, concerns, ideas, and then the leadership team reviews them weekly. We've had many great ideas that have come from those cards. Honestly, it blows my mind how many people just needed a piece of paper to be able to write something down that is really of value to our company and to our organization. We also implemented last year Kaizen. That's kind of a manufacturing thing, and we do those events, which it's an entire event. It's an entire day long, 2-day long event that's on the production floor that allows for everyone on that floor to directly focus on innovation during those 2 days. And it's basically finding the root cause and figuring it out, how we get this new process rolling to make it easier for everyone. And it's brought a lot of great ideas directly from the employees that know most about the product that they're working with, and that know most about that manufacturing process.
Yeah.
So,
well, you are totally speaking my language with these cards and these multi-day innovation events.
right?
We love that sort of thing at the efactory, and that's the perfect segue for me to jump over to Celeste to touch base. Of course, we have done a lot of what sounds like very similar work in a partnership between the efactory and CoxHealth, and that may be what Celeste is going to talk about, although I know they have so many innovation initiatives, she may want to talk about something else. So Celeste?
Yeah, that's actually a perfect segue. So what's nice, we've partnered with different organizations, including the efactory, to really get it to where innovation is ingrained in our culture. And even if you look at our employee surveys, where we survey employees and people in the community, they're starting to see us as a really innovative organization. Our last, we have a quarterly Leadership Development Institute Day where we take all 600 or 700 leaders off site, and we do different ways to develop them. There's always a theme, and the most recent one we had before COVID was actually about innovation, and it just highlighted all of the projects we've done as an organization, and it also challenged leaders to have the freedom to say no and to kill projects that aren't successful, then also to have avenues to bring them forward. But one of the most exciting ways, in my opinion, that we focus on innovation is through our Innovation Accelerator at the efactory. It's where we take 2 days to take people off site. We take 50 employees. Everyone applies to be a part of this program, to be one of the 50 participants. The committee that manages it then selects from those a variety of different areas. So some clinical individuals, a lot of frontline individuals, different facilities, different departments to make sure it's very well-rounded. And then there's a few leaders sprinkled in, and they get to have a 1-minute pitch with whatever their idea is. A couple years ago, Ashley Gregory, who's one of our recruiters, won it with the idea of automation, so robotic process automation for the HR onboarding program. And that has since, she pitched it. It made it to the next round, which is kind of a Shark Tank type round where the top 5-ish ideas go forward. And then there's a board member, several senior leaders that are judges that pick the winning idea that will be implemented. And her idea won, and has since pretty much formed a department. It's created some jobs locally to automate quite a few different aspects of our organization. But a lot of times what they find is, even though there's technically one winner, there's a lot of different ideas that are brought forward after that are implemented as well. And so that's something that just really gets it to where our culture is just focused on innovation, finding new ways to do things better that is still going to provide good service to our patients and our community.
Yeah, that's great. Thank all of you so much for your insight there. We've got our next question here that I want to transition a little bit. And so the 3 of you each work at what I would at least consider to be, larger organizations. And so we know we have people on the call with us today from organizations of, all size, from, single founder up to thousands of employees, and that everyone has workforce challenges. And so would you have any advice for those who are with smaller organizations? How could they address some of these same challenges that they're likely facing, but they may not have a dedicated person or a team like some of you may have working on this sort of thing? And we will start with Emily on this one.
Awesome. So my best advice would be that anyone can innovate at any time. So there are definitely some common myths that innovation is invention, and they go hand in hand. But innovation can lead to invention, but they are different. Another common mistake is that innovation needs to come from the top, which is not the case. Typically, some of our best ideas come from entry level, right? People walking in the door that see something and notice it immediately, and that's where we get our some of our best ideas. Innovation comes from a problem and taking multiple ideas and perspectives from all levels to get to that root cause and figure out a way to solicit several ideas and use others' perspectives to build out that idea. So the other recommendation is to listen to your clients, customers, employees, and not focus as much on the competition. I feel like a lot of organizations do that rather than listening to the people that truly they need to be listening to. If we're only focused on the competition, and I tell my leaders this all the time, if we're only focused on the competition, then we're just waiting for someone else to innovate before we move on to a new service or product or a new process. And then we're just in a constant state of catch up. So basically it's being willing to take that first step and say, listen, we can all come up with any ideas. Don't be afraid to speak up. That I think is going to be extremely, extremely important. And don't compare, to other organizations. You do what's right for your organization. You need to look at what you truly need to focus on. And I think that is definitely helpful.
Yeah, that's great. I think that note about, focusing on the competition is something that can trip a lot of people up. And again, organizations of any size in any industry. Celeste, anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, I think that that's all great. I would also say a part of it would be branding too, to make sure, especially from a recruitment standpoint, we may be a small organization, but hey, that makes it to where we're more agile and flexible, and we can do cool benefits like you get to pick out a certain amount of office supplies, things that we at larger organizations can't always do. That's a good recruitment tool, and to be able to advertise that. But also community networking, I think, is really important. I can't tell you how many events I've been at or I've been talking with someone from a small business and they're like, oh yeah, we're doing, XYZ. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Can I talk to you? Let's go out to lunch. I want to learn how you're doing that, see if I can implement that. But building those relationships in our community and being willing to be collaborative and transparent and share what we do well with each other gives us the ability to attract more talent here. And whether they're coming to CoxHealth or a smaller organization, they probably have friends or family members they're bringing with them. So the more we can, as a community, collaborate, build it to where our community itself is innovative rather than just one employer, I think that helps all of us.
Yeah. Okay. And Tim, I know you mentioned that you've been at the ARC for over a decade, but I happen to know you've also been involved with a startup or two. And so you have seen that spectrum of 1,000+ employees all the way to a team of just a few.
Yeah, I think they said things very well. The only thing I'd add is I think innovation starts with a culture of openness. And I've learned a lot from the people I've learned way more from the people we serve than the people I work with. Because I think I mentioned empathy earlier. I know this seems different, but empathy creates the ability to see the world outside of your own perspective. By nature, we're kind of egocentric and that's why I think some companies fall into this trap of top-down approach to problem solving instead of creating a culture of openness. I think we've learned more when we try to view the world from the perspective of the clients we serve. What would it feel like? What would it be like to use a wheelchair to ambulate, or not be able to use your voice to do that? So I think we've tried to create a culture of openness where we encourage feedback, we encourage communication, and we listen to people that on the front lines. And really try to create that culture of openness. That's the only thing I'd really add, and kind of from our perspective. And it just really, as you grow as a company, avoid the top-down approach to problem solving, and avoid bureaucracy, because that can really stifle creativity pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So this is something that you all have touched upon in your previous answers, and we'll start with Celeste if you have anything to add here. But yeah, oftentimes when you start talking about workforce and retention and recruitment and employee engagement, this culture word is wrapped up in those conversations as well. And we've seen that even in your answers so far today. And so how does an organization's culture, impact these challenges and solutions? And how do you see that playing out, in an instance at CoxHealth?
Yeah, I think culture is critical. It's the #1 key to success in recruiting and retaining your workforce. All organizations can have the same tactics. We can go to the same conferences to learn how to recruit. we can all do the exact same things, but in the end, it's culture that wins. And I think being transparent, kind of going through, obviously I love working at CoxHealth and I've always appreciated everything, but seeing how everything has we've navigated things through COVID-19, being able to see the public facing side, but also being able to see the internal workings, it's really reaffirmed in me, how great of a culture we have, but also how critical it is to the success during a crisis. Whenever we had all of these sudden workforce changes, and we're at a point where we have 300 people that aren't working at all, and their department has closed down, like the fitness centers, and then another 900 who aren't receiving their full hours, and then we're creating a process out of thin air and launching it the next day and saying, okay, leaders, here's what you're going to have to do. Employees, here's what you're going to do. You may be a nurse and doing surgeries, but tomorrow you're going to be at the front entrances taking temperatures. And just to see how receptive everyone is, and they trusted everything, they went with the flow, they rolled up their sleeves and pitched in, they were collaborative, they took care of each other. It just showed how important culture is, because we wouldn't have been successful in that. People would have questioned things, they would have not been as helpful had we not had that culture. And at one point when we were looking, whenever we built the 51-bed COVID unit, we had to look at how to staff that internally. And so we had two ways to approach it. We could either mandate employees, hey, you may be a surgical nurse, but we're going to cross-train you to take care of ICU COVID patients, or work in a med-surg unit so that those nurses could skill up to take care of COVID patients. So we had an option to either mandate, which we knew would be successful. I mean, we would get the people we need, or the choice to seek volunteers. And this is at a time when people were very nervous about COVID. There was still a lot unknown. And it was a gamble, but Steve Edwards and our chief nursing officer, Karen Kramer, made the decision to seek volunteers. And we had over 400 people, 400 nurses volunteer to join what we called Team 19, to work with critical patients and potentially put themselves at risk. Now, we know that they aren't at risk because they've got good PPE, we've got good processes, but still there's a lot of unknown. And I don't think that those over 400 nurses would have volunteered if they didn't have faith in what Steve and Karen and the rest of the team was telling them. So to me, our success, any success we have in HR and recruitment, and any of it really comes down to our culture. And without our culture, any initiative we launch, would probably be mediocre.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And again, especially during these times, we've been so, I think, fortunate as a community to have, the healthcare leaders that we have, and people really willing to step up and serve. So thank you for sharing that. Tim, anything that you would add?
Yeah, I would agree with everything she said. And I think Cox does a great job with all that. One thing I would add is I think we can kind of find guilty sometimes of putting in like trainings or something and think we're going to change culture. Culture requires changes. And about 7 years ago, we were pretty siloed here at the ARC. We had our accounting department and our HR department and our programs. And there was kind of some infighting where, hey, I'm a part of accounting. This is my job. That's not my job. So what we did is we systematically kind of broke those structures down, and we started placing accounting staff with our program staff. So if there's an accounting staff assigned to certain client accounts, we'd actually place that person within the program so then they would interact more and work together more as a team. And we did the same thing with HR. HR did a great job of kind of breaking down where we had HR staff report here, and they actually put recruiters in each one of our teams. So those recruiters were embedded not only in the teams, but also kind of in the culture, got to know each other, got to spend more time together. But we did that almost with every single one of our departments in kind of creating that culture and just making actual changes, not just talking about it, but making changes where we feel like it could kind of break some of the silos down. And I think sometimes a big organization can get that way where, oh, that's that department or this is the department, but we're all on the same team. It's one company. And I think sometimes it's really easy to fall into that mindset if you kind of allow for those physical barriers to exist and don't find ways to kind of break those down in that sense.
Yeah, that's great. I love the notion of a cross team. That sounds like a great way to reduce some of those silos that can pop up even when you don't intend for them to. Emily?
Yeah, I definitely would agree with both Tim and Celeste. Culture is absolutely critical. Probably one of my favorite quotes is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you don't have a good culture, your strategy isn't going to mean anything. It's not going to matter. Because you're not going to have people that are willing to work through the strategy, right? So many organizations' mission statements are around their clients, their people, and financial success. I'll take it back. I think innovation also plays a big role in culture. It allows people to feel like they're invested, and that you've invested in them and you believe in them, and that, you know, you can have that, I guess, you know, how Tim referred, that openness, you know, within your organization. Part of the biggest challenge is around actually obviously having that process to support the innovation and allowing space for innovation, being willing to accept failure, and making space with the time and money, you know. Those are things you also have to think about. And I think if you can make innovation part of your culture, it can be a competitive advantage for what you're trying to achieve. And having people buy into the concept of a true team is also critical in building a positive culture. You know, you can say all day, yeah, we're a team, we're a team, we're a team, but until people really buy into it and really feel valued and like they are invested in, they're not going to feel like a true team. And if they can feel that way and they work together as a team to meet challenges, everyone succeeds, right? So it's all about embracing the change, which has been monumental over the last few months. So that's pretty much all I would add.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of going back to what you said earlier, that notion of forced innovation, so much change in such a short time frame that everybody better get on board to make it happen.
That's right.
Okay. Well, I have one last question, and we're going to start with Tim, but I did want to mention that to all of our attendees. So if you have questions that you want to ask the panelists, I think that we'll have time for a couple of those. And so feel free to drop anything in the chat if it's for one panelist in particular, or if you have a question that you would like to pose to the entire group, feel free to put that there. And so I know that each of you, in answering the previous questions, have touched on different things that your organizations have done, specific events or programs that you've implemented, but we wanted to take a couple of moments and give each of you an opportunity really to spotlight any particular initiative or program that your organization has done in regards to innovation and workforce and all of these challenges that we've been talking about. And so Tim, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, thank you. I mentioned our remote supports team, so I want to start off with a quick success story of why it's so important to move in this direction. About 8 years ago, we began serving an individual that was living in his natural home with his family. He had some pretty significant behavioral issues, and he came into our 24/7 crisis services. So he was staffed with one-to-one staffing initially. He had a hard time. He will tell you his story. He's had a lot of issues in his past, but we spent a lot of time developing that relationship with him. He worked through that crisis service and then went to what is called an ISL, and then worked eventually to where he was in what is called CI. So he'd only get hours, maybe like 40 hours a week of service. He worked really hard. He's worked actually at Incredible Pizza for, I think, 5, 6, 7 years now, total, full-time or part-time at Incredible Pizza. So he went from that crisis services all the way to limited services to working. I'm so happy that last October, he was discontinued out of services completely. He's completely independent. He has his job. He has his own apartment. He talks to me. He'll text me once in a while and just check in on me. We had him speak at our event. We had our kickoff for our Pathways to Greater Independence. We had him come speak to all of our staff and talk to them why innovation is important from his perspective. And I think he said things I could never say. He came from a perspective of, listen, I received the services. I came in, I was one-to-one. I felt trapped by staff, ironically. I felt trapped in my life because staff were with me 24/7. I felt like an invasion of my rights is how he mentioned it. So he gave his story, and he talked about how much it meant for him, one, for someone to believe in him, but two, to give him the chance to succeed by pulling back. So we spent a lot of time in that training from his perspective, sharing why we have to have initiatives like reducing staff, why we have to have initiatives like remote supports, because the changes we make, especially in our field, impact people's lives tremendously, in a tremendous way, for better or for worse. So that's why I'm so passionate about starting our remote supports team. Beginning August 1st, we are starting our first remote supports team. So we're hiring what is called a remote support specialist. It's a direct support professional with additional training on technology and how to use the technology to support people remotely. And that team will start on August 1st with 6 people to start with. And then we're expanding that to 12 individuals in September. And then my goal by our fiscal year in next June is to have 40 individuals served remotely. And it could be anything from someone just having overnight. So we go from a 1-to-2 ratio where there's one staff for 2 individuals in a home to a 1-6 or 1-12 ratio remotely, I think we can make tremendous changes and create good change fiscally, because that budget's going to be tight in the state. But more than anything, we're impacting people's lives in a way that empowers them to become more independent and give charge over their own life. And I think I've learned, I went on some listening sessions with people we serve, and oftentimes they feel like no one understands how they think and feel, because they're told, you need this, you have this service plan, you're getting this staff, we're giving you this service, they're helping you do this. It's like, stop helping so much and empower me to help myself. And I think from that perspective, it's almost, it grips your heart with conviction a little bit on how you need to change things. So I think what I've learned through this whole process and looking at this remote supports team and finding new ways to do service, we had to be okay with not doing it the same way that we've done it for so long. And we have to fight against the grain a little bit, even with regulations, because we work with Medicaid and Medicare, and Celeste can probably attest to this too. Talk about regulations and stuff. Innovation is stifled oftentimes by regulations and by rules, but sometimes you have to rise the challenge and find ways to be okay with being wrong about how you're doing something. And that's what that was. We had to change our service model because we realized our service model was prohibiting the very thing we're trying to promote, and that's independence. So we're excited about the remote supports team that's starting. I could do a whole different session on what that even means and what that looks like as a service model, but it's anything from allowing people to take their own medications by reminding them or reminding them to go to work. We're expanding this team actually in the fall to where we're doing a remote supports not only for overnights and reducing overnight staff, but we're offering the service for people that just need extra assistance at home. If they're living with a family member, or they're living with a friend, or they're living in one of our homes, we're looking to increase this so they don't have to have physical staff all the time. They can have someone remotely help them with what they need to help with. So it's a little bit different than the question, but I think it really speaks to how that innovation sparked us and how we had to be okay with being wrong to becoming different.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the perfect answer to the question. And sounds like there's some really exciting stuff in the pipeline for the ARC. And so you'll have to keep us posted on all of that. We'll go to Emily next.
Yeah, so one of the things I had mentioned earlier that it seems like such a simple idea, and I'm slightly embarrassed that I didn't think about it before, right, is those continuous improvement cards that we ended up putting up last year. We have gotten some tremendous ideas that have saved us time, that has saved us money, that we have them all around the facility. And like I said, we check them regularly. That idea came from an entry-level employee fresh out of the gate. And it was a great idea. It allows employees to feel heard, which makes them engaged, more engaged, which makes employees work hard for the team that they're surrounded with. So we learned a long time ago that taking care of your team is instrumental in the success of your business. So we focus a lot on employee engagement events and things of that nature, because we do many skip level meetings. We do those twice a month with a select group of employees, just to kind of see where they are, what they're thinking, how they're feeling, kind of let them speak for the workforce, so we can kind of see what's going on ground level in our facility, because that's the most important thing, is to know how they're feeling and be able to react accordingly. So those cards have been a tremendous help in not only facilitating bits and pieces of those skip level meetings and being able to say, have something to refer back to and say, we've had people mention these 3 things on repeat. How do you feel? Can we talk about that in a smaller group setting? I'm telling you, it's such a simple idea, but it has made a tremendous impact in our organization. So
yeah, that's amazing. And I love the commitment, like you shared earlier, to the real and consistent review of those cards. So often there might be a suggestion box on a wall with a stack of note cards, but if there's that sense from employees that no one has emptied the box in 5 years, then they're less likely to want to share that. And so the secret is really in the follow through there. So I commend you for that. Celeste, anything?
Yeah, I think for us, one of the things I'm most excited about It's still in the works. We started it some, we piloted it, and we're going forward with it. Has to do with workforce development. So we're obviously very fortunate that we have Cox College, and they have their new campus finished the renovation on the north side. So I'm so excited. It's a beautiful facility. And that just keeps going towards our focus on developing talent locally. So in addition to the college, we're also trying to find ways to skill up our current workforce and help them go through different programs that they may not have thought that either they were able to, or they didn't have the finances, or just have the understanding of how to apply and register for certain things. So we started an MA apprenticeship with OTC, gosh, over a year ago now. And we now have we have it in a spot where part of that's grant funded, so they don't have any tax obligations. So we're excited about that. And we're going to build a guide around it just to say, so you may be in food services right now, but here are 10 different options. If you want to just get a certificate, if you want to go through a certificate program, an associate's degree, become a nurse or a radiologist, here's what it looks like. Here's the different ways CoxHealth will help you, and then help counsel them through that process, because we find a lot of people may not be comfortable with applying for college, or they may not know where to start. So to have people help walk them through that process, help them understand scholarships, and then also the funds that CoxHealth will provide. So really that initiative around career pathways that we're in the process of developing, in addition to the work we already do with our college and everything else.
Great. Okay, well, it does look like we have one question from an attendee in the chat box here, and this is a great question from Kevin. I think we've got time for this, and so I'll pose this question and then have a couple of things to share as we wrap up. And we'll go ahead, we'll start with Emily on this, although I know I'm really putting you on the spot with this. So Kevin says, there is still a lot of uncertainty in the future, which is, I totally agree, and wants to know, how is everyone preparing for surprises that might pop up in the next 6 to 18 months?
So I think for us and in our business, I think that we've learned a tremendous amount over the last few months on how to handle situations and communicate. We can't communicate enough to our employees and to our customers. We are over communicating at this point, which is probably, I'd say, the most important thing that you can do right now during these times is to communicate with everyone as much as possible. And that communication also has to come with knowing that we might not have all of the answers, because who does right now, using the resources that are available to us, but knowing that we might not have the answers and being transparent about just that as well. Because I'll tell you, I've stood in front of 600 employees and tried to tell them next steps throughout this whole thing, and it's a difficult conversation to have. But I have also been very transparent with our employees that there are questions you're going to ask me that I'm not going to have an answer to yet. And as soon as I do, I'll let you know. But it's just that open, transparent communication of, we're going to do what we can. We've prepared a lot since this started. We've ramped up in many different areas, safety and our cleaning and our sanitation and our communications and different things like that. We have really been putting plans in place that should have honestly been in place all along, right? So I think a lot of companies are in the same boat. Boy, I wish we would have had a better pandemic plan, and we just didn't. So I think that that's one of those things that lots of organizations are kind of trying to reassess right now. But communication, I think, is absolutely vital right now and moving forward with surprises, because we don't know what's going to happen. And that's okay. So I think that that's probably the most important thing that the most important way I could prepare myself is to have those difficult conversations with people. So
yeah, I totally agree. Transparency, and then I imagine that also coupled with, like Tim has said, empathy for where people are and the questions that they have. Tim or Celeste, anything that either of you would add to that?
I can jump in. In our organization, like many, normally there's a chain of command of, okay, if I have an idea, I need to bring it to a director, and then that director takes it to a VP, that VP takes it on up. But through this crisis beforehand, we proactively stood up what's called incident command, where they're a core group that functions as, the decision makers for the organization through all of this. And we anticipate them being in place through this. So it gives us the ability to have a seat at the table and just get decisions made rapidly. So that say that we do end up with a big surge here in Southwest Missouri and we have to open up the 51 bed COVID unit, I can just come up with an idea in a day on here's how I'm going to staff it. I can get it in front of them that night. They approve it and I operationalize it the next day. So that just makes us a lot more flexible to where there's initiatives that normally we'd be like, well, we need a committee and then a committee about the committee and then we have to do training manuals and a policy, but now it's pitch it and then implement. And so it just gives us a lot more flexibility and to make sure all campuses are aligned at the same time.
That's great. Tim, anything from you about what the future looks like?
Yeah, I think I know this sounds counterintuitive, but we have to find the ability to be okay with not knowing what's going to happen, being okay with the uncertainty. And I think that's very difficult when we want answers, we want plans. Well, plans are going to change, and they're going to change quickly, and they're going to change again. I think finding an effective way to communicate, it's okay to not know what's going to happen, but we're going to be prepared if it does. So we have a lot of plans. We have our pandemic plan. We have plans for everything, and we're charged with taking care with people who are considered very vulnerable. So we have to train our staff specifically, but from that standpoint, just the mindset, we have to be okay with the uncertainty and allow the flexibility to change on the fly and be okay with it. And for all the type A people that work with us, that's really, really hard right now. But it's fundamentally important so you can be flexible to know that when things are going to change. And you have to be okay with experts not knowing all the answers because they don't. No one knows all the answers. And I think that's really hard to wrestle with from that standpoint, but I think it's okay with not knowing what's going to happen.
Thank you. You're right. As someone with some type A tendencies, learning to live and work in this in between is, stretching me out of my comfort zone, which maybe is a good thing. Okay, well, those are all of our questions. Thank the three of you again so much for your time and your willingness to participate today. Typically, we'd love to do this in the perch at the efactory, and we would all be giving you a really warm round of applause right now. And so please imagine our virtual round of applause for our attendees who are with us this afternoon. All of our Lunch and Learns are co-sponsored between the efactory and the Missouri Small Business Development Center at Missouri State University. And so through our funding partners, we do ask that you take just a couple of minutes to complete the survey. So the QR code is there on your screen. If you'll hold your cell phone up to the QR code, it'll open in your browser, and just a couple of quick survey questions for you, and it would mean the world to us if you would take a couple of minutes to submit that. Thank you all again so much for being with us this afternoon. You can find more upcoming programs, most of which are going to be virtual, of course, on our online calendar. So efactory.missouri.state.edu. And I'll leave this up here for just a couple minutes in case anyone needs to scan that QR code. But otherwise, I will let our panelists hop off here, and I'm sure everyone has something else they need to get to this afternoon. But thank you again for being part, and we appreciate you all.
Thank you.